Did you know a single switch could turn midnight into a death sentence for a submarine? Over the Bay of Biscay in 1943, a consolidated B-24 Liberator from Coastal Command swept low, its ASV radar ticking down until the contact disappeared at about a kilometre. The crew threw the switch, and the ley light measured at roughly 22 million candle power burned the night into day. German lookouts were caught flat-eyed on the bridge. The ocean had been their cloak. Now it was a stage, and America helped light it. The new choreography felt impossible the first time you heard it. Radar finds the target. Pilots ride silence down the last seconds. The light pins the boat before it can dive. Then the airplane doesn't guess where the submarine will be. It tosses a thinking weapon into the sea. The U.S. Merc 24 Fido. An air-dropped acoustic homing torpedo slid off the rack, bit water, and began to listen. Piezoelectric, ears, vacuum tube, brain, and an electric drive gave it patience the enemy could not match. In combat analysis after the war, Fido accounted for about 37 submarine kills, with roughly an 18% attack effectiveness, nearly double the return from aircraft-dropped depth charges. That is not hype, that is a measured leap. Unless a positive antidote to radar could be found, the U-boat war would be lost. Admiral Karl Dönitz warned his scientists. That sentence is a confession dressed as an order. America's expanding VLR patrols and escort carriers carried radar that denied darkness to the submarine arm. And when the glare hit, it stole seconds, the most precious thing under fire. You can picture the panic. The bridge crew throws themselves for the hatch. The coxswain yanks the lever for a crash dive. Water hammers the hull, lights tilt red, and the screws spin up. But the noise that keeps them alive, the beat of their own propellers, becomes the signal our torpedo hunts. The human part made the science sing. Lieutenant Jur crewmen practiced the run-in until it felt like drill. Altimeter steady, bomb aimer calling range, pilot holding the nose just above the white cone. American maintainers kept the big Liberators ready in salt and spray, wiping carbon off the lee light's lamp head so it would throw a clean shaft on the next patrol. None of that looks heroic in a headline. All of it adds up to heroism you can measure. The enemy learned the same lesson the hard way. After the lee light arrived in strength in mid-1942 and spread into 1943, U-boat commanders started surfacing during daylight because at night the light gave them no time to duck. A composite pilot, call him Jack Ferris, because thousands shared his job, wrote one line that sounds like a thesis for the Battle of the Atlantic. We found them by math, kept them in the light, and let the torpedo do the thinking. Math, radar plots, and HF divided by DF bearings. Light, an American-equipped search beam that stripped away darkness. Thinking, a weapon simple enough to mass-produce and clever enough to curve toward the kill. Our system turned miles of ocean into a funnel that guided airplanes to submarines and submarines to their fate. The enemy's shock ripples through post-war interrogations. Watch officers said the glare punched through eyelids. Some described the light as like noon. Some admitted they froze. The men who still tried to fight stayed up to man the 20mm mounts, hoping to soar a wing off a closing Liberator. But the calculus had flipped. If they dove, Fido hunted their sound. If they stayed up, radar called more aircraft. If they ran, the light ran with them. Nothing about that is simple, but the feeling it leaves you with is Americans and their allies took a night ocean full of unseen teeth and made it visible, predictable, beatable, bridge to next. If America could do that in the dark, what happened when industry joined the hunt in daylight and delivered more ships than the wolf packs could ever kill? Did you know one American yard built and launched a full-size Liberty ship in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes? The record SS Robert E. Peary at Richmond, California wasn't a parlor trick. It was proof the arsenal of democracy could turn the enemy's tonnage war into a math problem they couldn't solve. The first Liberty, SS Patrick Henry took 244 days. By mid-war, 42 days was typical. Then the Peary roared down the ways in under 5. U-boats could write poetry about wolf packs. We wrote schedules. The question in 1942 was brutal. Could America replace ships faster than U-boats could sink them? Our answer wasn't a speech. It was a welding arc. Prefabricated sections swung in on cranes, plates kissed in perfect seams, and hulls stacked up like boxcars. The United States built about 2,700 Liberty ships. Convoys bulked up with escorts, and escorts now meant destroyer escorts with HF divided by DF sets and hedgehog ahead throwers, plus air cover from very long-range B-24 seconds. When you add aircraft with radar, Lee lights, and FIDOs, and then add hunter-killer groups built around escort carriers, you don't just offset sinkings, you collapse them. Listen to the human music inside those numbers. Ruth Delgado, a composite welder at Permanente Metals Yard No. 2, could have been any one of thousands. Her hands were burned brown from slag. Every bead of weld, she might have written home, is a mile of ocean the U-boats can't control. She, and the teams like hers, made it possible for a captain in a convoy to look over his shoulder and see 100 more wakes, not 10. That is what the factory floor feels like at sea. Confidence thick enough to breathe. The enemy watched the curve and knew what it meant. German war diaries admit the tonnage battle turned sour as convoy sizes grew and escorts multiplied. A wolf pack thrives on isolation. It withers in crowds. The Peary's 4-day launch was a symbol, but the real killer was the routine. Hull after hull rolling out in weeks, not months, while aircraft totals rose and radar sets spread like seeds on the wind. By 1943, Liberty hulls were sailing faster than torpedoes could erase them. The convoy columns stretched and the hunt reversed. Field commanders on our side leaned in. Destroyer escorts like USS Chatelaine DE 149 and USS Pillsbury DE 133 started drilling with escort carriers such as USS Guadalcanal CVE 60 to form roving hunter-killer groups. They weren't chained to a single convoy. They went looking for trouble. Trouble found them and regretted it. When HF divided by DF bearings intersected on a chart and a radar scope flickered, Avengers rolled with depth charges or FIDOs, and surface escorts charged in to finish with hedgehog patterns that burst only on contact. Industry fed this machine. The machine defended industry. That loop is what victory looks like in a modern war. Holy shit. Here is simple. We launched a full cargo ship almost as fast as most people finish a work week. And we did it again, and again, and again, until the Atlantic looked less like a graveyard and more like an American highway with Royal Navy patrol cars. You can taste the salt and hot steel of it. You can hear the rivet guns and the yard whistles, then the deep whistle of a ship clearing the harbour loaded with flour, fuel, and fighters. You can picture a U-boat periscope trailing the columns and seeing nothing but abundance and escort masts. Bridge to next. We built the ships and swarmed the lanes, but the ocean is gigantic. How did we find a steel needle in 30 million square miles when the needle only whispered for seconds? Did you know a 20-second burst of radio could doom a submarine? High-frequency direction. Finding HF divided by DF. Huff-duff turned brief enemy signals into lines on a map that crossed like an X over a hidden boat. A U-boat sent a contact report to Wolfpack Control. Within moments, American and British bearings from shipboard loops and shore stations triangulated the call. That wasn't magic. That was math with steel teeth. One authoritative estimate credits HF divided by DF with contributing to roughly a quarter of all U-boats destroyed. When you combine its fixes with radar, ultra-decrypts, and air coverage, you get a hunt that starts before the enemy knows it has begun. Here is the problem, framed the way commanders felt it. The Atlantic is too big. A convoy is a speck. A submarine is a rumor. How can you mass force at the exact place where a predator will cross the path of prey? The revelation every third chapter, we ask and answer, was to make German radios work for us. The enemy had to talk to coordinate attacks and refuel their milch cows. Every word they sent drew faint arrows toward their position. Shore sites in Britain and North America, plus compact sets on escorts, turned whispers into bearings, and bearings into vector orders for hunter-killer groups. Escort carriers launched Avengers straight at the intersection. Human moments make the system memorable. A captured radio man, Carl Wittig, a stand-in for many POWs interviewed, told his interrogators a line countless operators later echoed. I felt naked every time I keyed the mic. You can picture him in the radio shack, headphones tight, sweating over Enigma ciphers while the sea slaps the hull. He does not fear the message. He fears the invisible ears. On our side, a young wave analyst in a stateside HF divided by DF station stepped out after a shift and looked at the night sky. She hadn't seen the ocean in months, but her pencil lines were steering destroyers through it. When those lines pointed true, the shock on the other end was immediate. A U-boat commander rose to periscope depth after a quick signal and saw not darkness, but a pattern of masts and aircraft shadows. The escorts weren't stumbling across him. They were driving to him, and if he tried to run on the surface, he lit his own. Fuse radar would grab him, the light would bloom, the attack would come. If he dived, pipes groaned, and the propellers sang, and somewhere above an Avenger opened its bomb bay for a torpedo that listened. HF divided by DF wasn't a weapon you could shoot. It was a feeling in the enemy's stomach that something unseen had already found them. The bridge forward is natural. With bearings to hunt and skies full of wings, America needed mobile airfields to carry the fight into any patch of ocean. We built them. We taught them to roam. And the U-boats learned that the convoy wasn't the only danger the sheriff had come to town. Did you know America put airfields where there was no land at all? Escort carriers, jeep carriers, like USS Bogue, USS Card, and USS Guadalcanal, were built fast and sent to roam, not merely to guard. A convoy could be bait. The carrier group was the hook. Destroyer escorts formed a hard ring. HF divided by DF ears hunted for whispers. And Grumman TBF Avengers waited on the deck with depth charges, rockets, and the new Merc 24 homing torpedo. The sea felt big until a CVE arrived and made it small. Picture a day on a deck the size of a ball field. A green flag snaps, an Avenger claws into the wind. The crew chief checks the lee light lens, slaps the olive drab torpedo's blunt nose, and yells the last checklist. On the bridge, the air officer reads bearings from a destroyer's HF divided by DF plot and a fresh radar contact from a scout. Bogue's group stacked confirmed kills across the central Atlantic. Card's group hunted the milch cows, the refueling submarines that kept wolf packs alive. Guadalcanal's group drilled like a prize fighter that loves road work. Names matter because they prove this is real. Captain Daniel V. Gallery, Chicago-born and electric with ideas, trained Task Group 22.3 to do more than protect. He drilled boarding parties. He drilled night recoveries. He drilled radar intercepts until a 3 a.m. launch felt like noon. His carrier, USS Guadalcanal, CVE 60, sailed with destroyer escorts, Chatelaine DE 149, Flaherty DE 135, Pillsbury DE 133, Pope DE 134, and Jenks DE 665. That was a moving city of steel that could redraw the map any hour it wished. A German diary from a surviving boat captured the shock in 6 words. Air where there is no airfield. See the photograph in your head. A CVE's deck jammed with Avengers, wings folded like birds at roost. Smell gasoline and hot oil. Feel catwalk grit in your teeth. Hear the boatswain's pipe cutting thin against the wind. On that tiny deck, Americans solved the Atlantic's biggest problem: distance, by refusing to accept it. Build a small carrier. Put it everywhere. Take away the enemy's room to think. When contact came, the dance looked like a factory come to life. A destroyer escort ran in, hedgehog mortars coughing arcs that only exploded on contact. Truth got punished, guesses did not. Above, an Avenger roared down to drop Fido if the boat tried to dive. The torpedo did not care about clever turns. It cared about the song of the screws. The carrier radioed courses for the ring of escorts, and within minutes the ocean felt tight, like a room with too many doors locked. The wolf, cornered, stopped being a hunter and became a problem to be solved. The enemy's shock was not cowardice. It was respect curdled by dread. U-boat men were pros. They ruled the first years. Now, their logbooks read like weather reports of bad news. Sighted aircraft. Crash dived. Depth charges followed. Or worse, aircraft at night with searchlight. Hearing torpedo. German command no longer saw free hunting grounds. They saw swaths patrolled by names Bogue, Card, Guadalcanal that kept returning like a tide. Here is the human heartbeat. An Avenger pilot wrote home that his airplane carried the ocean's patience and the shipyard's anger. A boatswain's mate told a chaplain, "Sir, we're a porch light for the Atlantic. The bugs come, in, and we swat." Those lines ring because the system gave them the right to say it. Every takeoff risked a cold sea, every run risked flak. They launched anyway because the math finally favored courage. And here is the truth that binds us forward. Escort carriers did not only protect, they prowled. They dragged the fight into an enemy that thought water itself would hide him. They could do it day after day because America linked ears, HF divided by DF, eyes radar and Lee light, claws hedgehog and Fido, and legs, the CVEs, into one animal. Air on call means nothing without a score to play. So who wrote the music for those mid-ocean ambushes? Intelligence did. Signals did. People in quiet rooms turned sparks into arrows, and the arrows found targets. Did you know that a sentence sent in secret could summon an airplane to a pinprick on the sea? Bletchley Park cracked naval enigma again in 1943. OP-20G in Washington. Fused decrypts with shipboard HF, divided by DF fixes. And those arrows were handed to carrier air groups that could be anywhere. Intelligence did not merely inform, it orchestrated. The ocean looked empty. Our operators knew better. A few letters, a call sign, a time, and a bearing could build a kill. The problem sounded impossible. How do you mass force at the exact place where a predator will cross the path of prey? The revelation is that the enemy had to talk to live. Wolf packs could not gather without radio. Milch cows could not refuel without messages. Every transmission drew faint lines from shore stations and ship loops to the source. A destroyer escort took a first cut. A second ship took another. On the plotting table, lines crossed like an X. A carrier launched. The hunt began before the target felt hunted. The human element makes the map breathe. A young wave in a stateside, HF divided by DF station, stepped into the night after a shift and felt the cold. She had not seen the Atlantic in months, yet her pencil lines were steering destroyers through it. In Britain, a code breaker walked to the canteen, teacup rattling, and told herself the day's crib might keep a convoy alive. On the deck of USS Card, an Avenger pilot buckled in, pointed down the bearing called Ultra Priority, and said to his radio man, "They're out there because the girls with the pencils say so." Respect ran uphill. On the other side, a radio man in a U-boat shack keyed fast and prayed faster. "I felt naked every time I keyed the mic," a German POW later admitted. He was competent. He was proud. He was also already marked by geometry. The moment he sent, the clock started. A destroyer heard. A shore sight heard. Bearings moved from paper to the carrier's air plot. Engines turned. An ocean he could not see began to move against him. This was brains married to flight decks. Ultra decrypts hinted where wolf packs would form. HF, divided by DF, nailed positions in the moment. Radar caught the surface run. The Lee light blinded the night, and the kill rarely came from one piece alone. It came from all of them together. That is the American way in this story. Not one miracle, but the miracle of combination. You can point to Bogue's board, Card's log, Guadalcanal's intercepts, and you will see the same pattern. Find, fix, finish. Quotes still carry the day. A few letters in the right order saved a shipload of lives, one American analyst wrote after the war. A British Coastal Command pilot put it more simply. The set spoke. We went. Those are not slogans. They are working notes from a system that learned in real time and corrected in real time. The output was not only sinkings, it was silence in the convoy lanes. It was a captain who finally slept. The enemy finally saw coordination as the killer. It was not the ley light alone. Not HF divided by DF alone. Not Ultra alone. It was all of it, handed to hunter-killer groups with the authority to move first. That is why the curve bend in 1943 looks like a cliff. That is why Black May hit like a hammer. And that is why the next step feels inevitable. Give the airplane a weapon that could think in the water and let the numbers do the talking. Did you know a cheap torpedo with ears turned dives into deaths? The US. Merc 24 Fido was an air-dropped acoustic homing torpedo built with simple piezoelectric ears, vacuum tube logic, and an electric motor famously adapted from washing machine stock. It cost about $1,800 a unit, which meant we could buy thousands, not dozens. In combat, it was credited with roughly 37 submarine sinkings out of about 200 attacks, an 18% success rate, nearly double the old aircraft depth charge average. The ocean stopped hiding because the noise a submarine made to live became the path to its end. The question in 1943 was a hard one. Could America mass-produce precision? Depth charges were brute force. Hedgehog was smart but contact-sensitive. Fido listened. An Avenger did not have to guess a point ahead of a turning diving target. It could feed a patient hunter into the water and let physics and sound finish the job. That changed tactics overnight. Pilots attacked at night with confidence. U-boats that tried to crash dive found that the screws that might save them were the very beacons that betrayed them. Walk through a strike, radar ticks, the lee light flares, and the boat lunges for depth. The pilot calls Fido away. The torpedo slides off the rack, bites the black water, and arcs on sound. In the control room, the angle changes, gauges tremble, and the crew strains for those last meters of safety. Then the boat hears a new sound, thin and rising. It is not a depth charge pattern above. It is something alive below. It knows. The detonation is not thunder, but a hard punch where steel meets sea. Lights fail, men scramble, bubbles and oil bloom to the surface like a signature. The power here was not just cleverness. It was that American factories could build a guidance weapon, simple enough to scale. An initial plan called for 10,000 units. Only a few thousand were needed, because the weapon worked, and the enemy's ocean kept shrinking. That is the arsenal of democracy at its sharpest. Excellence you can count. Crews who carried Fido believed in it. We found them by math, kept them in the light, and let the torpedo do the thinking. One pilot said after his tour, "That sentence is the thesis of victory." POWs felt it too. A captured machinist's mate told his interrogator, "When we heard it, we said nothing. We just waited." Pride did not vanish. Skill did not vanish. Hope did. The math moved faster than courage could. If a boat stayed up, air called more air. If it dove, sound guided steel. If it ran, the light ran with it. Resistance was not pointless. It was brave, but it bent under results. Here is the holy shit moment worth tattooing on the chapter's last page. A torpedo cheap enough to buy by the thousand simple enough to maintain at sea, clever enough to find a submarine by its own heartbeat, and deadly enough to change the graph. Add that to HF divided by DF fixes, ultraplots, radar sweeps, Lee light courage, and escort carrier reach, and you get May 1943 Black May, when the U-boat arm lost so many boats that Dönitz pulled his wolves back. That is how America answers a hard question. It builds the answer and makes enough of it to matter. Did you know 1 month broke the back of the wolf pack? In May 1943, sailors named it Black May. The U-boat arm bled boats at a rate no navy can endure. 40-plus submarines were lost in 31 days. Many historians count 41 in the Atlantic battle zone, with additional losses in transit and training accidents. Escort carriers like USS Bogue and USS Card patrolled the central lanes. Very long-range B-24 Liberators seeded the sky. Destroyer escorts drove with sonar and hedgehog. The old rhythm: spot a convoy, shadow it, call the pack, attack at night, shattered, and under radar, Lee light, HF divided by DF, and the Merc 24, Fido listening in the black water. You feel the snap in the morning reports. Convoys HX and SC roll west with air cover staged from Iceland, Northern Ireland, and Newfoundland, and after October 1943 the Azores to close the gap. A short, hard HF divided by DF cut peels off a U-boat. Another destroyer confirms. Lines cross like an X on the chart. Bogue's Avengers launch. One carries Hedgehog, one carries Fido. The ocean, once a hiding place, feels suddenly small, like a room where every exit has a guard. Numbers do not boast, they convict. During May 1943, merchant sinkings cratered while U-boat losses spiked. Hedgehog patterns, 240-pound bombs that only detonated on contact, punished truth and spared guesses, teaching hunters to chase solid sonar returns. ASV radar and the Lee light flipped the night from safe to lethal. Escort carrier hunter-killer groups USS Bogue, CVE 9, USS Card, CVE 11, and their sisters roamed untethered from any one convoy, swarming toward HF divided by DF bearings and ultra hints. The curve turns like a cliff because the system graduated. Find, fix, finish again and again. Voices carry what charts can't. The set spoke. We went. A coastal command pilot wrote, condensing thousands of sorties into 5 words. A boatswain on a destroyer escort remembered Black May as oil more than fear, slicks spreading across cold seas where a crippled boat bled out. A wave analyst slid pins on the operations plot and later told her sister, we had more arrows than they had boats. On the other side, a German watch officer scribbled a line that sounds like a sigh. Lay light at night, crash dived, homing torpedo heard. The enemy was competent, proud, and suddenly cornered. Captains surfaced by day to avoid the blinding beam and found the sky crowded. Milch cow, Type 14 tankers, lifeblood for endurance, were singled out and destroyed, so packs starved in mid-ocean. Radiomen cut, messages short, knowing every second on the key drew angles toward doom. The chessboard had lost squares. Surprise now belonged to an Allied machine that learned faster than it bled. Here's the holy shit marker to pocket. In 1 month, the U-boat fleet lost roughly a quarter of the submarines it had at sea. Replace a hull? Perhaps. Replace a trained crew and a hard-won confidence? Not at that tempo. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, a realist even in faith, pulled his wolves from the North Atlantic lanes he had once treated like a private hunting preserve. The wolf pack as a concept survived. The wolf pack as a terror faded. Black May did not end the war at sea. It ended belief in a U-boat victory. Convoys grew fatter, escorts sharper, aircraft ranges longer, OEG graphs colder and clearer. And just when the enemy might have hoped for an Allied misstep, the Americans did something beyond sinking. They took a U-boat alive on the high seas and towed it home like a captured secret. Did you know America captured a German submarine at sea and kept it? On 4 June 1944, Captain Daniel V. Gallery's Task Group 22.3 escort carrier USS Guadalcanal, CVE 60, with destroyer escorts USS Chatelaine DE 149, USS Flaherty DE 135, USS Pillsbury DE 133, USS Pope DE 134, and USS Jenks DE 665, cornered U-505 west of Cape Blanco, French West Africa. Chatelaine gained sonar contact, ran in, and stitched the ocean with depth charges and hedgehog. The boat broached, blew tanks, and skidded half awash. Gallery's order, recorded in the after-action: "Cease firing away boarding parties." Imagine the chaos under that hard African Sunday: scuttling charges, hiss, hoses scream, and men tumble into the sea. American cutters sheer alongside, while gunners freeze their fingers off triggers. G. Albert David takes the first team over the casing, drops into the conning tower, and disappears into noise, water, and darkness. He earns the Medal of Honor for doing something the textbooks called reckless and the war called necessary, saving a dying submarine while the sea tries to eat it. This was not only courage, it was rehearsal. Gallery had drilled boarding parties for months. He drilled night recoveries, radar intercepts, and the weirder what-ifs a restless mind collects. He knew a live capture could be worth a dozen sinkings, code books, devices, ciphers, and morale. Guadalcanal took the tow, a jeep carrier dragging a 750-ton prize like a stubborn fish. Cameras clicked. Booms groaned. A week later, U-505 sat hidden behind high fences at Bermuda, its insides catalogued under strict need to know while the war still burned. Voices cut through the spray and ash. They told us to stop shooting and start taking a submarine. A deckhand laughed years later, still tasting incredulity. A German machinist's mate, wrapped in an American blanket on Guadalcanal's deck, whispered, "Es ist vorbei, it's over," not knowing the next sunrise would find Allied fleets barreling toward Normandy. A radio man on Pillsbury grinned like a kid watching a parade as tow lines bit and the improbable scene steadied. A carrier towing a captured U-boat, aircraft circling above to keep sharks with periscopes away. The enemy's shock wasn't fear. It was respect, curdled by dread. The Kriegsmarine watched a boat built under strain and crewed by trained men, hauled intact into Allied hands by a roaming group that had set out to hunt, not merely guard. That turns a page. It tells every captain still at sea that he faces opponents who practice the unthinkable before breakfast. It tells every staff officer ashore that American doctrine is built to exploit, not just to kill. Here is your holy shit stack, neat and true. HF, divided by DF ears, found the whisper. Escort carrier Reach made the intercept. Destroyer escorts pinned with sonar and hedgehog. Avengers held the circle. A pre-planned boarding doctrine turned minutes into salvage. Then, American hands did what American hands do: shut valves, kick charges, rig pumps, lash tow lines, and keep the thing alive long enough to squeeze it for secrets. G. David's Medal of Honor stands as the human punctuation mark. Bridge this forward with a simple thought. If the Allies could seize a submarine alive, what could they do to the last sanctuary that had protected the wolves, the mid-Atlantic air gap? The answer arrived with wings on islands that had stayed neutral, a chain of escort carriers that brought land to sea, and a new kind of routine in which "no coverage" stopped being a phrase. Did you know there used to be a hole in the sky big enough to hide a fleet? Early in the war, the mid-Atlantic air gap lay beyond land-based patrols. U-boats surfaced there at night to charge batteries, meet Type 40 milch cows, and mass for convoy strikes. Closing that hole felt like trying to pave the ocean. America and her allies did it by treaty, by runway, and by steel decks that floated. Watch the map change. In 1943, Portugal granted the Allies access to the Azores. Lages Field on Terceira put very long-range B-24 Liberators in the middle of the gap. Iceland, Newfoundland, and Northern Ireland already stitched the north. Escort carriers CVE jeep carriers like Bogue and Card stood in as stepping stones where there was no land. The whole shrank to a seam, and seams leak. By autumn, patrol grids overlapped, convoys woke to engine notes overhead, and U-boat captains learned that even the middle of the ocean now had neighbours. The problem once sounded impossible. How do you arrive on a patch of empty water at the exact minute a submarine must surface? The revelation was integration. HF divided by DF cuts from convoy escorts through lines across charts. Ultra-decrypts hinted at rendezvous points. ASV radar caught the first combers peeled by a moving periscope or the faint return of a conning tower. At night, the lee light turned secrecy into silhouette. VLR liberators learned to leap below weather, hold rough air with iron hands, and climb back through icing that had grounded earlier models. If we stayed up, we were seen. If we went down, we were heard, a German officer later summarized. The human details make the Atlas breathe. A B-24 crew chief at Lages kept a notebook of squawks so his airplane would make one more dawn launch. Salt mouthed the aluminum, and still they flew. A convoy commodore watched wingtip lights blink above at first light and felt years fall off his shoulders. An Avenger pilot on a CVE deck tucked his scarf and told his radio man, "No land? We brought ours." On the other side, a German navigator thought he had picked a clever rendezvous, then lifted his head and saw a carrier deck where a map promised nothing. The enemy's shock felt like claustrophobia. There was no quiet place to charge anymore. Surfacing invited radar even in rain. Running invited a bar of hard white night. Diving fed Fido the very sound it needed. Milch cows, once the invisible gas stations of the deep, became hunted nodes. Their loss starved wolf packs of time and reach. Captains still fought hard, competent, professional, brave, but the chessboard had lost squares, and their best moves now walked into prepared ambushes. Here is the holy shit truth to carry. The safest place for a submarine became the most dangerous, because America put air where there was no land and paired machinery with brains. The closure held. Convoys rolled. Britain ate, armed, and built. The sea, once a coin toss, steadied into a highway, and even that wasn't the end of the sharpening. The next edge came from pencils, rulers, and brutally honest questions. What tactics actually work, and how do we teach them faster than the enemy can adapt? Did you know we fought part of this war with pencils and graph paper? The U.S. Navy's Operations Evaluation Group, OEG, harvested patrol logs, attack films, and after-action reports, then asked rude questions. At what range, altitude, and angle do we get the best surprise? What pattern produces the highest contact detonation rate? When should crews hold Fido in the bay, and when should they let it listen? The answers weren't slogans or memoir fluff. They were checklists and one-page memos that changed how men flew and fought within weeks. The problem officers posed was simple and brutal. Can we turn courage into repeatable results? The revelation was that fast feedback loops win wars. OEG analysts showed that low beam-on-attack profiles for radar-equipped aircraft boosted surprise on surfaced U-boats. That Hedgehog should be fired from closing speeds which kept contact under the bow. That depth charge patterns should bias shallow on night attacks against crash divers. That Fido, the Merc 24 mine, ought to be reserved for diving targets where sound guided success. Squadrons shifted altitudes, angles, and release points not at the speed of a textbook, but at the speed of a mail sack and a ready-room brief. Human voices make the math feel like a weapon. Every decimal point was a life raft reaching port. One young analyst wrote home after a 16-hour day turning scribbles into survival. An Avenger pilot back from a Black Sea run scanned the latest tactics bulletin and said to his radio man, "They found us a better way to be brave." A sonarman on a destroyer escort learned to trust a new closing curve in the last noisy seconds before Hedgehog. when the bombs exploded only on contact. His captain's grin told him the theory had teeth. The enemy felt the change without seeing the paperwork. Moves that had worked last spring failed in autumn. The head-throwing weapons denied U-boats their favorite slide under a destroyer's bow. Short, violent night strikes punished lingering on the surface to man 20mm guns. Aircraft stopped wasting circles. They made one clean, fast pass from the angle that turned evasion into exposure. The cruel part of good analysis is that it makes the other man's courage cost more. Here's the holy shit arithmetic. Bump your probability of kill by a few points, fly thousands of sorties, and you move mountains. Shave 2 minutes from localization and hand those minutes to a homing torpedo, and escapes evaporate. Record every miss, redesign the next week, and luck turns into learning. Our crews weren't superheroes. They were professionals armed with measured truth and a supply chain ready to answer. More radar sets, more sonars, more hedgehog projectors, more Merc 24 seconds now. The bridge to the next surge is the factory drumbeat. Analysis mattered because production could answer instantly. If the sheet said, "We need more," Detroit, Willow Run, and Richmond didn't flinch. They did not refill the shelves. They extended the store. Did you know one American plant built a heavy bomber every 63 minutes at its peak? Ford's Willow Run turned B-24 Liberators into a timed promise. Jigs marching, wings mating, engines lowered while fresh paint still flashed. On the coasts, yards pushed Liberty and Victory ships into water by the thousands. The record sprint for SS, Robert E. Peary, 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes stole headlines, but the miracle was the average. Weeks, not months. Destroyer escorts rolled out in the hundreds. Radar sets and HF divided by DF receivers, stacked in crates like ammunition. America did not sprinkle strength. It poured it. The question on any U-boat staff officer's board in 1943 turned unbearable by 1,944. Can we sink ships faster than the Allies can build them and guard them? The revelation was no. Escorts with HF divided by DF ringed convoys. Hunter-killer groups prowled. VLR aircraft closed the sky. Behind every frontline unit stood replacements that looked endless from a wet periscope rim. The tonnage war, once Germany's chosen fight, became a graph trending the wrong way, no matter how you scaled it. People carried the load, not slogans. A riveter at Willow Run scratched, for Joe on convoy duty, inside a Bombay panel, and went back to her gun. That airplane might roll over the Azores 2 weeks later. A welder at Richmond Yard rubbed carbon from her eyelids and watched a hull slide into the bay, knowing it would carry grain to Liverpool and come back for tanks. A chief boatswain's mate on a DE counted new radar sets arriving in crates and joked, "They're breeding in the hold." That's the smell of victory. Dope, oil, hot steel, and coffee you don't have time to finish. The enemy's shock shows up as resignation in the war diaries. Convoy sizes increasing, air escort constant. One entry reads, another. No refuel possible, Milchko destroyed. U-boats once wrote the script. Now they read stage directions someone else printed. Merchant losses collapsed while U-boat losses stayed punishing. Even the training pipeline strained. Green crews faced veterans flying measured tactics with better tools. Here's your holy shit list, all nails and numbers. A heavy bomber every 63 minutes. Thousands of merchant hulls launched. Hundreds of destroyer escorts commissioned. Tens of thousands of radar and HF divided by DF sets deployed. The arsenal of democracy became not a phrase but a table of production that made strategy feel inevitable. And when parts failed, GIs fixed them with tape, wire, and stubbornness, the pocket genius that turns shortages into jokes and downtime into stories. The bridge to the close is the ledger of outcomes. If you want to know who won, look at who could afford to be generous while fighting. The Allies did not only sink enemies, they rescued survivors, fed prisoners, and kept the highway of freedom so reliable that planners scheduled an invasion on it. Now we tally the results that once sounded impossible and, by late 1944, read like routine. Did you know? The Atlantic, once a graveyard, became a highway so steady commanders planned D-Day on it like a commuter route? By late 1944, Allied arrivals soared, while merchant losses to U-boats collapsed. Hunter-killer groups had sunk or captured scores of submarines. The Wolfpack era ended in a retreat order and a reality no message could soften. The highway of freedom carried armies, fuel, and hope to Europe on a timetable kept by factories as much as by fleets. The final question answers itself. Why could only America do this? Because a free people fused ingenuity, industry, integration, and initiative into one weapon. We mass-produced a homing torpedo, the Merc 24 Fido, simple enough to buy by the thousand and smart enough to hunt by sound. We lit the night with ley lights and found enemies with ASV radar and HF divided by DF. We put airfields where there was no land by building escort carriers and sending them to Rome. We measured what worked with operations research and changed tactics in days, not years. We outbuilt losses with shipyards that made weeks feel like hours. Each piece mattered. Together they were unbeatable. Let real voices close the book. We found them by math, kept them in the light, and let the torpedo do the thinking, an Avenger pilot wrote after his tour, summarizing an era in one line. A few letters in the right order saved a shipload of lives, an analyst said of Ultra and HF divided by DF fusion. From the other side came the sentence that still chills. I felt naked every time I keyed the mic. A captured radio man admitted. Those 3 lines fit like a code: brains, machines, and the human cost measured in breaths and seconds. The enemy realized the slope of the graph had become destiny. Patrol notes read like laments: lay light, crash dived, torpedo heard, refuel impossible, air presence constant. Dönitz, the hardest realist in the room, pulled his boats from the North Atlantic in May 1943 and never regained the initiative. Germany could launch new hulls, it could not launch new months or new oceans. The U-boat war had been about time and distance. America conquered both by turning distance into range and time into production. Here are the last holy shit markers to etch in steel. Black May's 40-plus U-boats gone. A captured submarine U-505 towed into secrecy while the war raged. The mid-Atlantic gap closed by wings from the Azores and by carriers that carried land with them. A B-24 every 63 minutes at Willow Run. A Liberty ship in 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes at Richmond. And a cheap acoustic torpedo that turned a submarine's heartbeat into a target line. Wrap those facts in one image, the white beam of a lee light burning a path on black water, and you see the war's hinge. We end where we began, with light on dark seas and ordinary Americans doing impossible things on schedules that read like boasts. A radar sweep ticks, a switch throws, white floods the waves. Somewhere below, a crew hears a faint rising sound and knows the old rules are gone. Freedom wins when free people build together. That is why the Atlantic became ours. That is why convoys arrived. That is why America could plan history on a calendar and then sail into it on time.